Anwar Sadat, President of Egypt, winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, fighter for...
This is NBC Nightly News with John Chancellor in New York.
Good evening. Most of the world is in mourning tonight for President Sadat of Egypt, murdered by assassins. His death pleased a few, but saddened millions, and it is agreed by all that the world and the Middle East will not be the same again now that he is gone. It happened this morning in a suburb of Cairo on the occasion of Armed Forces Day in Egypt, an event watched at a military parade. Suddenly, the reviewing pavilion became a gory bloodbath. Here is Paul Miller.
This was the anniversary of one of Anwar Sadat's happiest days, the day in 1973 when his army crossed the Suez Canal and recaptured part of the Sinai. The parade commemorating the event had been going on for 90 minutes when 6 men dressed in Egyptian uniforms opened fire on the reviewing stand from the back of one of the trucks. Bill Foley, an Associated Press photographer, was next to the reviewing stand.
And then all hell broke loose. People were screaming and yelling. Bullets were going back and forth from security men to the truck. You could see wounded people all over the place. I saw one guy in the steps of the reviewing stand close to Sadat. He was obviously dead.
To say 9 people on the reviewing stand were killed, 22 wounded. President Sadat was hit 3 times. He was rushed to a nearby military hospital where he died in surgery 3 hours later. Paul Miller, NBC News, Cairo.
There will be a state funeral on Saturday. Within a few hours of the shooting, the shattered and shocked Egyptian leadership gathered to name someone to take Sadat's place, at least for a while. Art Kent has that story from Cairo.
Tonight, the man in charge in Egypt is Hosni Mubarak, the 53-year-old vice president, who presided over an emergency cabinet meeting called 3 hours after the shooting. The cabinet dutifully named the Speaker of Egypt's parliament as interim president, but Mubarak was named commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and it is the military that holds the reins of power. Air Force chief during the 1973 war, Mubarak was chosen by Anwar Sadat to be vice president and also to follow him as president. It was Mubarak who went on Egyptian television and radio to announce Sadat's death to the Egyptian people and to assure the world that Egypt will honor all its treaties and commitments, including the peace treaty with Israel. In the streets of Cairo, there were tears in people's eyes. A form of limited martial law has been imposed for the next year and all mass meetings banned. But life appeared to go on much as usual. There were no demonstrations. Sadat was a religious man and a fatalist, as he showed in this interview with an NBC correspondent in 1977.
No one will kill me one moment before God permits. This is in our religion.
The final test of Anwar Sadat and the Egypt he has tried to build over the past 11 years will come in the next days and weeks. The future of peace in the Middle East may well depend on how the moderate pro-Western state he has created endures the shock of his death. Art Kent, NBC News, Cairo.
Today's assassination was carried out with military precision based on knowledge of today's parade by men prepared to die. Over the years, Sadat had trouble with the Egyptian military, with officers resentful of the peace pact with Israel. There was grumbling over poor pay. A former American official recalled today an American intelligence report that Sadat was forced to call off an operation against Libya 2 years ago because some key army units said they wouldn't fight. Then there were the civilian protests. James Compton in London has more on those.
They were noisy, but the protests against Camp David at first did not seem serious, and Sadat ignored them. When his opponents burned a mock Israeli flag in downtown Cairo, police watched but did not interfere. But arrests began after police killed 30 in Cairo streets during a June disturbance between fundamentalist Muslims and Coptic Christians. Sadat ordered 2 prominent Muslim leaders to jail, and in following weeks, about 1,500 people were arrested, including journalists and politicians, Muslim and Christian. At that, Muslim anger flared. There were further street riots. Severe security was imposed. The government continued to blame the tensions on problems between Muslims and Christians. All 6 opposition newspapers were closed down. Sadat went before Parliament. No mercy, he said. Muslim religious societies were dissolved. He removed the Coptic Pope, Shenouda, from office, charging him with political agitation. Just how tense Sadat had become was evident when he called in reporters to scold them about their coverage, saying American journalists in particular were undermining him.
Sadat must appear before the United States and the whole world because of the arrest of those traitors. I call traitors.
Sadat seemed troubled, even confused by the disorder and dissent in his country in recent months, which seemed to rob him of the benefits he expected for taking a chance on a more open society in Egypt. James Thompson, NBC News.
Reaction to the assassination from President Reagan and members of Congress after this. The death of Anwar Sadat has given President Reagan his first real international problem. It affects American interests in the Middle East, and its effect on the president's plan to sell military equipment to Saudi Arabia has yet to be determined. Here's how it went at the White House today, reported by John Palmer.
President Reagan got word of the Sadat shooting in a phone call from Secretary of State Haig at 7:25 this morning, 20 minutes after the attack occurred. The first word was that Sadat had been wounded, but not seriously. President Reagan then sent a message to Sadat expressing shock at the attack and saying, "We stand ready to assist in any way we can, including the provision of medical assistance." Then came reports that Sadat was dead, reports the White House was unable to confirm until 2 o'clock Washington time, when Cairo radio and TV made the announcement. President Reagan called Sadat a courageous man of vision.
His death today, an act of infamy, cowardly infamy, fills us with horror. America has lost a close friend, the world has lost a great statesman, and mankind has lost a champion of peace. And Nancy and I feel that we have lost a close and dear friend.
President Reagan met Sadat for the first time 2 months ago yesterday, when Sadat paid a state visit to the White House. Aides said the two men established a warm relationship during their 2 days of talks. Late this afternoon, President Reagan met with his top national security advisors to discuss the implications of Sadat's assassination. The White House says it is pleased that the Egyptian government is following its constitutional process in choosing Sadat's successor, and pleased that Egypt says it will continue its dedication to the Camp David peace accords. No announcement yet on whether President Reagan will attend Sadat's funeral. John Palmer, NBC News, at the White House.
In the Senate this afternoon, there were a number of people reconsidering their positions on the proposed sale of AWACS radar planes to Saudi Arabia, reconsidering because of the death of Sadat. Here's Tom Pettit.
The news hit official Washington very hard. Defense Secretary Weinberger was testifying on Capitol Hill.
Catastrophic news, both personally from the point of view of the enormously valuable contribution that he made.
The Senate Foreign Relations Committee was meeting to discuss the stability of Saudi Arabia in connection with AWACS. But Sadat was Chairman Percy's concern.
A noble man, one of the noblest men I have ever met and known.
Immediately, amid the Sadat death watch, senators spoke of the impact on the AWACS debate. Pressler, anti-AWACS.
That the AWACS thing should be withdrawn and sent back again in about 60 days when we can judge it.
I think we should step back, take a good look, and see how things come together.
Baker, Republican leader in the Senate, pro-AWACS, very subdued.
I do think we ought to sort of place a moratorium on ourselves worrying about it for the time being, though.
Anti-AWACS Tsongas, worried nonetheless.
In the post-AWACS defeat period, that having someone like Sadat around would have been very important.
Dodd took a shot at AWACS.
And that an AWACS would not have saved an Anwar Sadat.
One opponent of AWACS reversed his position. Hatch, Republican.
The Sadat shooting did push me over.
Lugar, uncommitted or leaning for, till today.
I will support the sale in committee and on the floor.
So Reagan may be picking up some support for AWACS today, suddenly. After all, Sadat saw the AWACS sale as an instrument of peace, and far beyond the AWACS debate. Senators are profoundly concerned about peace between Israel and the Arab world. Tom Pettit, NBC News, at the Capitol.
3 American officers, 2 from the Air Force, 1 from the Marines, were in the audience today in Cairo when the shooting started. All 3 were hit by bullets. None is in serious condition. There were a number of signs today of the growing power of Egyptian Vice President Mubarak. One of them is the fact that a kind of martial law has been imposed on the day that he took command of the military. The new acting president is Sufi Abu Taleb, Speaker of Parliament. He will serve until elections later this year. But Mubarak is the man to watch. 2 reports on him.
Hosni Mubarak is probably the most adroit politician in Egypt and will almost certainly emerge as the new power in his country. Sadat trusted him completely and groomed him for the succession. In recent years, Mubarak has been sent on sensitive political assignments and is known to most world leaders.
The mission from President Sadat, President of Egypt, to meet with President Reagan.
But he also acted as Sadat's hatchet man, getting rid of those who opposed the president. There was ex-Chief of Staff Gamassi, ousted when the peace initiative began. Former Prime Minister Mustafa Khalil, removed just before Camp David. And former Defense Minister Kamal Hassan Ali, shunted into the Foreign Office. Mubarak got them all for Sadat, knows how to maneuver politically, and enjoys one huge advantage over potential rivals. He is from the Egyptian military establishment, once ran the Air Force, and now controls all the armed forces. He is strongly anti-Soviet, and first came to prominence by helping Sadat throw the Russians out of Egypt in 1972. Late today, the Politburo of Egypt's ruling party unanimously nominated Mubarak for president, and there's very little doubt that when elections are held, he will win. Steve Delaney, NBC News, at the Egyptian Embassy in Washington.
Sadat's death poses a giant challenge for the Reagan administration, keeping the peace process alive without the man who gave it life. Officials hope Mubarak will follow in Sadat's footsteps, but they are really not certain. They suspect Mubarak will be under enormous pressure from Saudi Arabia and others to reverse the Camp David process and to rejoin the Arab world in a reunited front against Israel. Mubarak has said Egypt will adhere to the Camp David Accords and to the peace process. For one thing, that's the only way Egypt has any chance of getting all of the Sinai back next April as scheduled. U.S. officials are nevertheless concerned about the possibility of an outbreak of fighting between Egypt and Libya. Equally concerned about the possibility of new fighting in southern Lebanon, touched off by Palestinian extremists who may feel it's their moment to move. The Soviet response to the latest thunderclap in the Middle East is key to the chances of heading off grave instability in the area. There is no question, potentially this is the biggest crisis to hit the Reagan administration. Marvin Kalb, NBC News, the State Department.
Anwar Sadat and Israel's Menachem Begin shared some great moments together as they forged a peace agreement in 1979. Before that, it would have been impossible for a hardline Israeli politician like Prime Minister Begin to mourn the death of a president of Egypt. But that happened tonight in Jerusalem. Bob Kerr has the story.
Soon after the flag was lowered at the Egyptian embassy in Tel Aviv, people began to gather across the street to wait for the latest announcements. At his home in Jerusalem, Prime Minister Begin waited too, and tonight spoke sadly of losing a partner in the peace process and a friend.
President Sadat was murdered by the enemies of peace. During our many meetings, personal friendship was established between us. I therefore today lost not only a partner to the peace process, but also a friend.
Mr. Begin called the Camp David peace process unforgettable. Tonight, other Israelis are calling the future of that process uncertain. Former Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin.
That when it comes to the Arab countries, there is no tradition, it's not customary there, that one leader pursues the policies of his predecessor.
There seemed little question 4 months ago when Sadat and Begin met in the Sinai that the handover of this Israeli-occupied desert would be completed as scheduled next April. Now, residents of Sinai towns like Yamit question whether the land should be given back to an Egyptian government not led by Anwar Sadat. There is great shock and concern here tonight. Israel knows now that what will be tested is whether its peace agreement with Egypt is a lasting one between two nations or just one between two men. Bob Kerr, NBC News, Tel Aviv.
In the Palestinian sections of Beirut, Lebanon, there was celebrating. Many Palestinians believe Sadat sold them out for peace with Israel. The Palestine Liberation Organization congratulated the assassins. One PLO leader, a close associate of Yasser Arafat, said, "We shake the hands that fired the bullets." In Libya, Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, who was Sadat's deadly enemy, went on television to rejoice. He said today is a historic day, that the death of Sadat signifies a new era for the Egyptian people. Gaddafi told his people, "We are expecting more movement in Egypt. The army and the students will begin to move." Reactions from prominent Americans were, without exceptions, expressions of regret and sorrow. We'll hear some of them in a moment. The news of President Sadat's death came as a shock to most Americans. Following his visit to Jerusalem in 1977, Sadat became a popular figure with Americans. And with high American officials, Sadat was a forceful and persuasive negotiator. Here's how some of them view his death.
I don't know of anyone who's ever contributed more toward peace on earth in my lifetime, perhaps this century, than has President Sadat. But he was always a man of courage. He never feared for his own life if it meant the advancement of the well-being of his own people in Egypt, nor peace in his region and throughout the rest of the world.
The death of President Sadat was a great tragedy. President Sadat was a world leader of great vision, tremendous courage.
I'm devastated by it. I find it really hard to imagine what it's going to be like without him. He was a magnificent man, a great statesman, a great leader, a devoted and real friend of the United States.
We have a duty, if peace is important in the Middle East, to continue working for it. And he is difficult to replace, painful, unimaginable, and yet it's our duty to do it. And I don't accept the fact that he is irreplaceable. It is a terrible sadness and a terrible loss, and we have to work with it.
In a minute, John Hart takes a look at the remarkable career of Anwar Sadat. Our final report tonight is a look back at Anwar Sadat's life, prepared by John Hart. For many of his 62 years, Anwar Sadat was just a face in an Egyptian crowd. Even when he achieved high office, that of vice president, he was in someone else's shadow. But it was a meaningful life, full of adventures, and during the last 11 years, it was lived at the crest of the wave. Here is Hart's report.
Sadat was a villager who wanted to become an actor, but who became, one after another, a military officer, a collaborator with the Germans in World War II, a revolutionary against his king, a meek and then masterful president of Egypt, a client and then an opponent of Russia, a maker of war and then of peace with Israel. When he was a child in his village, reading the works of Gandhi, the British controlled Egypt. And when Sadat got to the military academy, he organized a secret officers group to plot against the rule of the British. Because England's World War II enemy was Germany, Sadat contacted the German staff to offer collaboration, but he was discovered and sent to a British jail, saying later it would have been disaster had the Germans won, but after all, they were the enemy of his enemy. He escaped the British jail, was arrested again, accused of terrorism against the government, and was set free by Gamal Abdel Nasser, who had taken over the secret officers group, which in 1952 overthrew King Farouk and sent him into exile on his royal yacht. The British had lost control of Egypt. Nasser had gained it. And Sadat was scarcely noticed, always walking behind, the inoffensive vice president, nicknamed Nasser's Poodle. When Nasser, the preeminent Arab leader of his time, died in 1970, Sadat was widely seen as too weak to survive as his successor. Then began a life of public surprises. He suddenly purged his rivals and showed his well-hidden iron will. Militarily, Egypt was totally dependent on the Soviet Union then, which had every reason to think of Egypt as a docile client. Until another surprise in 1972 when, without warning, Sadat ordered the Russians to leave the country in a week. From Nasser, Sadat had inherited Egypt's humiliation in defeat in the Six-Day War of 1967. Nobody believed Sadat's frequent threats over the years to attack the Israeli armies on the Suez Canal. So the attack in 1973 was a surprise, a devastating offensive which struck on the Jewish holy day of Yom Kippur. It was bloody on both sides, but Egypt won back some pride. The resulting hatred and suspicion between Israel and Egypt kept the Middle East in an unrelieved mood of crisis. Suddenly, typically without warning, Sadat let it be known in 1977 that he was willing to go to Israel to try for a lasting peace. The world was electrified to see Israel's enemy there in the Israeli parliament saying, "You want to live in this part of the world? We welcome you," in sincerity. From that moment, those Arabs who rejected Israel became Sadat's enemies. But from that moment, through the signing of the Camp David agreements with Israel, Sadat was, in the West at least, the statesman who turned against the habits of hatred, the devout Muslim, the village boy who obeyed his instincts, knew the risks and took them, the leader who surprised the world by saying he was for peace and meaning it. John Hart, NBC News.
Well, that's nightly news. Our coverage of the Sadat story will continue later this evening after the late local news on your station when we present a special broadcast called The World After Sadat. Until then, good night for NBC News.
The latest news developments and more tomorrow morning on Today.